Chapter 8 Explorations. Dune had taken to wandering the pipeworks alone. He would go to his assigned tunnel and do his job quickly. Once you got good at using your wrenches and brushes and tubes of glue, it wasn't hard. Most of the workers did their jobs quickly and then gathered in little groups to play cards or have salamander races or just talk and sleep. But Dune didn't care about any of that. If he was going to be stuck in the pipeworks, he would at least not waste the time he had. Since the long blackout, everything seemed more urgent than ever. Whenever the lights flickered, he was afraid the ancient generator might be shuddering to a permanent halt. So while the others lounged around, he headed out toward the edges of the pipeworks to see what he could see. "Pay attention," his father had said. And that's what he did. He followed his map when he could, but in some places the map was unclear. There were even tunnels that didn't show up on the map at all. To keep from getting lost, he dropped a trail of things as he walked. Washers, bolts, pieces of wire, whatever he had in his tool belt, and then he picked them up on his way back. His father had been at least a little bit right. There were interesting things in the pipeworks if you paid attention. Already he had found 3 new crawling creatures: a black beetle the size of a pinhead, a moth with furry wings, and best of all, a creature with a soft, shiny body and a small spiral-patterned shell on its back. Just after he found this one, while he was sitting on the floor watching in fascination as the creature crept up his arm, a couple of workers came by and saw him. They burst into laughter. "It's Bug Boy," one of them said. "He's collecting bugs for his lunch." Enraged, Dune jumped up and shouted at them. His sudden motion made the creature fall off his arm to the ground, and Dune felt a crunch beneath his foot. The laughing workers didn't notice. They tossed a few more taunts at him and walked on. But Dune knew instantly what he had done. He lifted his foot and looked at the squashed mess underneath. Unintended consequences, he thought miserably. He was angry at his anger, the way it surged up and took over. He picked the bits of shell and goo off the sole of his boot and thought, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to hurt you." In the days that followed, Dune went farther and farther into the pipeworks, holding on to hope that he might find something not only interesting, but important. But what he found didn't seem important at all. Once he came upon an old pair of pliers that someone had dropped and left behind. Twice he found a coin. He discovered a supply closet that appeared to have been completely forgotten, but all it held were some boxes of plugs and washers and a rusty box containing shriveled bits of what must once have been someone's lunch. He found another supply closet at the far south end of the pipeworks. At least, he assumed that's what it was. It was at the end of a tunnel with a rope strung across it. A sign hanging from the rope said, "Caved in, no entry." Dune entered anyway, ducking under the rope. He found no sign of a cave-in, but there were no lights. He groped his way forward for 20 steps or so, and there the tunnel ended in a securely locked door. He couldn't see it, but he felt it. He retraced his steps, ducked back under the rope again, and walked on. a short distance away, he found a hatch in the ceiling of the tunnel, a square wooden panel that must lead, he thought, up into the storerooms. If he'd had something to stand on, he could have reached it and tried to open it, but it was about a foot above his upstretched hand. Probably it was locked anyhow. He wondered if the builders had used openings like this one during the construction of the city to get more easily from one place to another. On days when his job was near the main tunnel, he sometimes walked along the river after he had finished working. He stayed away from the east end where the generator was. He didn't want to think about the generator. Instead, he went the other way, toward the place where the river rushed out of the pipeworks. The path grew less level at this end and less smooth. The river here was bordered with clumps of wrinkled rock that seemed to grow out of the ground like fungus. Dune liked to sit on these clumps, running his fingers along the strange creases and crevices that must have been carved somehow by running or dripping water. In some places, there were grooves that looked almost like writing. But as for things of importance, Dune found none. It seemed that the pipeworks was no use after all to a person who wanted to save the city. The generator was hopeless. He would never understand electricity. He used to think he could use electricity to invent a movable light if he studied hard enough. He took apart light bulbs. He took apart the electric outlets on the wall to see how the wires inside wound together and, in the process, got a painful, vibrating jolt all through his body. But when he tried to wind wires of his own together in exactly the same way, nothing happened. It was what came through the wires that made the light, he finally understood, and he had no idea what that was. Now he could see only two courses of action. He could give up and do nothing, or he could start to work on a different kind of movable light. Dune didn't want to give up, so on his day off one Thursday, he went to the Ember Library to look up fire. The library occupied an entire building on one side of Bilbolio Square. Its door was at the end of a short passage in the middle of the building. Dune went down the passage, pushed open the door, and walked in. No one was there except for the librarian, Ancient Edward Pocket, who sat behind his desk writing something with a tiny pencil clutched in his gnarled hand. Gnarled is one of our vocabulary words. The library had two big rooms, one for fiction, which was stories people made up out of their imaginations, and the other for fact, which was information about the real world. The walls of both rooms were lined with shelves, and on most of the shelves were hundreds of packets of pages. Each packet was held together with stout loops of string. The packets leaned against each other at angles and lay in untidy stacks. Some were thick, and some were so slim that only a clip was needed to hold them together. The pages of the oldest packets were yellowed and warped, and their edges were uneven rows of ripples. These were the books of Ember, written over the years by its citizens. They contained in their close-written pages much that was imagined and everything that was known. Edward Pocket looked up and nodded briefly at Dune, one of his most frequent visitors. Dune nodded back. He went into the fact room to the section of shelves labeled F. The books were arranged by subject, but even so, it wasn't easy to find what you wanted. A book about moths, for instance, might be under M for moths, or I for insects, or B for bugs. It might even be under F for flying things. Usually, you had to browse through the entire library to make sure you had found all the books on one subject. But since he was looking for fire, he thought he might as well start with F. Fire was rare in Ember. When there was a fire, it was because there had been an accident. Someone had left a dish towel too close to an electric burner on a stove, or a cord had frayed and a spark had flown out and ignited curtains. Then the citizens would rush in with buckets of water, and the fire was quickly drowned. But it was, of course, possible to start a fire on purpose. You could hold a sliver of wood to the stove burner until it burst into flame, and then for a moment it would flare brightly, giving off orange light. What's up, guys? It's Miss Flanagan here with a video of my electric burner that I always talk about when I read this story and I never show anybody. But now, since we're stuck in quarantine, you get to see what an electric burner looks like. Woo! So I'm turning it on. And in a second, of course this is going to take longer. There we go. So you can see underneath there are coils. They're very hot because it's a stove. And don't mind the cooked on, mess that's on here that you can definitely see now. But it makes it hot, and then you can put your pan on top and you can cook. Yay! And that's what an electric stove looks like. It doesn't have any fire. It has coils. I really exposed myself with this dirty burner here. The trick was to find a way to make the light last. If you had a light that would keep going, you could go out into the unknown regions and see what was there. Finding a way to explore the unknown regions was the only thing Dune could think of to do. He took down a book from the F shelf. Fungus, it was called. He put it back. The next book was called How to Repair Furniture. He put that back too. He went through foot diseases, fun with string, coping with failure, and canned fruit recipes before he finally found a book called All About Fire. He sat down at one of the library's square tables to read it. But the person who had written the book knew no more about fire than Dune. Mostly, the book described the dangers of fire. A long section of it was about a building in Winifred Square that had caught fire 40 years ago, and how all its doors and all its furniture had burned up and smoke had filled the air for days. Another part was about what to do if your oven caught on fire. Dune closed the book and sighed. It was useless. He could write a better book than that. He got up and wandered restlessly around the library. Sometimes you could find useful things just by choosing randomly from the shelves. He had done this many times, just reached out and grabbed something, in the hope that by accident he might come upon the very piece of information he needed. It would be something that another person had written down without understanding its significance, which means importance. Just a sentence or two that would be like a flash of light in Dune's mind, fitting together with things he already knew to make a solution to everything. Although he had often found something interesting in these searches, he had never found anything important. Today was no different. He did come across a collection called Mysterious Words from the Past, which he read for a while. It was about words and phrases so old that their meanings had been forgotten. He read a few pages. Heavens above indicates surprise. What heavens means is unclear. It might be another word for floodlight. Hogwash means nonsense, though no one knows what a hog is or why one would wash it. Batting 1,000 indicates great success. This might possibly refer to killing bugs. All in the same boat means all in the same predicament. The meaning of boat is unknown. Interesting, but not useful. He put the book back on the shelf and was about to leave when the door of the library opened and Lena Mayfleet came in. What's up, guys? It's Miss Flanagan here to remind you about idioms because Dune was just reading a book full of idioms. And so, just to go over it, an idiom is a common expression that people use in conversation. The overall meaning of an idiom is completely different than what the words mean. So, we've talked about this in class. When we say that test was a piece of cake, it means it was easy. It does not mean that it was literally a piece of cake. Or if we say, I'm feeling blue, we don't mean that we are literally blue, the color. It means we're sad. And even though they no longer have the literal meaning, sometimes the meaning of an idiom came from something in reality. So we talked about this when we talked about It's Raining Cats and Dogs. That came from when people had thatched roofs back in the old pilgrim times, and it would rain so hard that they would literally fall through their thatched roof. So let's go over some of these idioms that Dune found, and I will use them in a sentence for you, and I will make it a timely and appropriate sentence, and we can talk about being in quarantine. So, number one, heavens above indicates surprise. So you would say it in the same way that you would say, like, whoa, or like, wow. It's an interjection. So you might say, if you're shopping at the grocery store, you would say, heavens above, this store has toilet paper in stock. What a lucky day. The next one is hogwash, which means nonsense or a bunch of, baloney. So, let's see. Someone said that the quarantine was going to be over this week, but I told them that's a bunch of hogwash because it means nonsense. All right, batting 1,000 comes from baseball. Obviously, Dune does not know what baseball is. That is something that we can infer based on his conversation with himself, and from reading what the people wrote in the book. So it's, the best that you could do in baseball, basically. Don't quote me on that. I'm not a big sports person. So anyway, it just means that you're doing really well. You can also use it sarcastically. So I'll do it both ways for you. First, we'll use it the correct way with no sarcasm. So batting 1,000. Let's see. I got to go outside of my house today and take a walk. So I was really batting 1,000. I was doing great, having a great day. Now we could use it sarcastically too, which is how you will hear it sometimes in like books or movies as well. So if I wanted to use it sarcastically, I would say, today I woke up late, I stubbed my toe, we were out of bread, and it's raining outside. I'm really batting 1,000 here. And that's how you would use it sarcastically. All right, the last one and the most important one, because it lets us know that Dune does not know what a boat is. It's all in the same boat, which means all in the same predicament, which means all in the same, problem. It could be used positively too. Usually it's used to try to make people feel better when they're in a negative situation. So I will leave you with this example. We're all in quarantine right now, so we're all in the same boat. We're all in the same predicament. And we're all trying to learn online. And I hope that you enjoyed your second Miss Flanagan Masterpiece video and that you were able to follow along in your packet. Make sure that you check your calendar so that you know what pages to work on. You should be able to finish the comprehension questions and the extension for chapters 7 and 8. And yeah, tune back in tomorrow for your next video. Oh yeah, one more thing. If you really want to try to give yourself some extra work to do today, you can try to use one of these idioms in a sentence with someone, and if they don't know what it means, you can explain it to them now. All right, now I'm done for real. Don't forget to like and subscribe to my video.